You ever have one of those moments when something happens and your whole body just goes still, like your gut knows, right then and there, that someone picked the absolute wrong person to screw with? That was me, standing in my kitchen on a Thursday morning holding a bright white envelope from the HOA with big red letters stamped across the top. Final notice. Now, I'm not the kind of guy who gets rattled easily. I'm not loud. I don't throw tantrums. But I believe in one thing more than anything else. If someone comes after me without cause, I don't just push back. I push back hard enough that they never even think about trying it again. Inside the envelope was a typed letter informing me that I was being fined $500 a day for unauthorized modifications to the exterior of my property. What modifications, you ask? Solar panels. That's right, solar panels. State approved, city permitted, top-of-the-line panels I had professionally installed to cut my electric bill and make use of all that blazing afternoon sun. I did everything by the book, triple-checked the codes, even ran it past a private inspector, just to be sure. But the HOA, they said it disrupted the visual harmony of the community. I stood there rereading the letter while my coffee went cold on the counter. $500 a day. That's 15 grand a month for having solar panels. The kind of upgrade that increases property values, saves energy, and, oh yeah, helps the environment. But apparently, in my neighborhood, it was offensive to the eye. I had lived in this community for less than a year. I picked it because it was quiet, clean, and close to hiking trails. I'm a retired tech entrepreneur. I started a software company in my garage when I was 23, sold it at 35 for a figure most people don't even dream about, and decided to step out of the game for a while. I bought the house outright and figured I'd enjoy early retirement in peace. No drama, no chaos. I wasn't trying to make waves, just wanted to live my life, read some books, hike on the weekends, and maybe finally try woodworking like I'd always talked about. But there's always that one person in every neighborhood who thinks they were born to rule over others. In ours, that person was Roger Townsend, the self-declared king of the cul-de-sac. He was the president of the HOA and had apparently held that role for the last 8 years. No one had run against him. No one had wanted to. Most of the neighbors avoided eye contact when his name came up. The man treated the HOA like his personal kingdom, patrolling the streets in a modified golf cart with a neon HOA security sticker on the side and an actual flashing orange beacon on top. I'm not kidding. Roger had a way of popping up when you least wanted to see him. I was pulling some weeds in my front yard a few hours after reading the letter when I heard that familiar whirring engine. His golf cart cruised up slowly like some kind of suburban shark. "Morning," he said with a smirk, stepping out and adjusting his cheap mirrored sunglasses. He had that slicked back haircut and one of those unnecessary Bluetooth earpieces, like he was always on an important call that never came. I stood up, dusting off my hands. "Morning." He reached into the pocket of his windbreaker and pulled out a clipboard with a copy of the letter I'd already received. "Just wanted to personally deliver this in case the mailman forgot. We take rule enforcement seriously. Around here." "I noticed," I said, keeping my voice level. "Your panels are a violation of Section 6A, Paragraph 2, he said with satisfaction. "No exterior alterations without board approval." I nodded slowly. "They're solar panels, permitted by the city, environmentally responsible, installed professionally." He raised his eyebrows. "That might fly with the city, but we have higher standards." "And by we, you mean you," I said. He grinned wider. "We warned you. Either take them down or start paying." "You're really fining me $500 a day?" I asked. "Yep. Starting today," he said, patting the clipboard. That was the moment. That was the second I decided this. Wasn't going to go away with polite conversation. Roger had no real power, but he thought he did, and nobody had ever stood up to him. I was going to be the first, and I wasn't going to fight him on his terms. As he stepped back into his cart, I called out, "You ever hear the saying, 'Don't poke the bear'?" He paused, glancing back. "Is that supposed to scare me?" No, I said. Just a piece of advice. One day you'll wish you listened. He snorted and drove off, tires crunching gravel like it was some kind of threat. I walked back inside, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, sat down at my kitchen island, and opened my laptop. There are fights you walk away from, and then there are fights you prepare for. I didn't want a war, but if he was bringing one to my door, I was going to make damn sure I finished it, and I already knew exactly where to start. I'm not the kind of guy who wastes time yelling at walls or arguing with people drunk on power. I believe in solutions, not shouting matches. So after Roger strutted off in his little golf cart with his mirrored sunglasses and smug grin, I sat down with a clear head and a goal: find the pressure point. Everybody has one, even suburban tyrants like Roger. The first thing I did was call my real estate attorney, Monica. Sharp as a blade and worth every dime. I explained the situation, emailed her the fine notice, and gave her the rundown on Roger, the HOA, and the solar panels. She chuckled. You want to sue the HOA? No, I said. I want to own the person trying to find me. There was a pause. Go on. I want everything you can legally find on Roger Townsend. His house, his finances, any liens, any debts. I want to know if he's vulnerable. Monica was quiet for a moment, and then I heard the click of her keyboard. All right, she said. Let's see how deep this rabbit hole goes. What we found was gold. Roger had over-leveraged himself. Badly. He had refinanced his house 2 years ago after doing a massive kitchen remodel, built a sunroom, and added a second-story deck with a hot tub. He boasted about it in the HOA newsletter like it was a triumph of architectural achievement, but behind the scenes he was bleeding money. Turns out, he'd taken out a second mortgage with a smaller regional bank that was more than happy to sell that loan for the right price. The balance wasn't small, but I'd made more than enough in my last business deal to write the check without blinking. It was almost too easy. Monica handled the negotiations. The bank didn't ask many questions. A week and a half later, I had the papers in hand. I owned the mortgage on Roger Townsend's house. To be clear, I didn't do it to destroy the man's life. I didn't want his house, and I didn't want to bankrupt him. I just wanted him to understand what it felt like to have someone standing over him, pointing a finger, setting the rules. I wanted him to remember that he wasn't invincible. The day after the paperwork was finalized, I drove to Roger's place. I didn't bother with subtlety. I pulled up in my truck, parked right in front of his precious manicured lawn with the 2 ceramic lions guarding the walkway, and walked up holding the folder. He was outside again, clipping the same hedge he always fussed over, wearing his HOA proud windbreaker and that damn earpiece like he was about to negotiate a hostage situation. When he saw me, he sighed and set down the shears. I hope you're not here to argue about the fine, he said. Nope, I said, smiling. Just thought you should be the first to know. Your mortgage? It's been sold. That got his attention. His eyes narrowed. I'm the buyer, I added, handing him the letter from my lawyer. Effective immediately. I now hold your debt. He didn't take the paper at first, just stood there blinking like he couldn't process what he was hearing. Then he snatched the letter from my hand and started reading, his lips moving silently. You're bluffing, he muttered. I can assure you I'm not. You can't do this, he said, voice rising. This is harassment. It's a legal transaction, Roger. You took out a loan. I purchased the note. You'll be making your payments to me from now on. His face turned red. He actually sputtered, like a cartoon villain caught monologuing too long. You bought my mortgage to get back at me? I bought it, I said, because you tried to fine me 15 grand a month for clean energy. His voice dropped to a low growl. This isn't over. Oh, I know it's not, I said, stepping back toward my truck. By the way, you're behind on this month's payment. I won't charge a late fee. Yet. He stood there, trembling, gripping the folder like he was deciding whether to throw it at me or eat it. I climbed back in my truck and drove off slow, savoring the sight of him standing alone on his perfect little lawn, his world shifting under his feet. You see, I didn't want revenge. I wanted balance. He'd made this personal. He could have come to me like a neighbor. He could have had a conversation. But instead, he went nuclear with that fine, assuming I'd roll over like the others probably had. But I'm not wired that way. I don't roll over. I build. I solve. And when someone like Roger decides they want to play king, I don't argue. I just buy the kingdom. That night, I got a certified letter from the HOA reaffirming the fine and reminding me of my responsibility as a member of the community. I laughed and poured myself a drink. Let them keep digging their own grave. I had the shovel now. Still, I knew Roger wouldn't give up quietly. The man had too much pride, too much ego. But that was fine. I didn't mind a little noise, because while he was busy plotting his next move, I was preparing mine. And if he thought buying his mortgage was the end of the story, he had no idea what was coming next. Roger didn't go down easy. The day after, I let him know I owned his mortgage. He tried to keep up appearances. He still drove his golf cart up and down the neighborhood, waving to people who no longer waved back. He still wore that ridiculous HOA president badge pinned to his chest like he was running a police department instead of a glorified neighborhood watch. And he still sent me daily fine notices by mail, each one more aggressive than the last. I didn't respond to any of them. The truth is, I was playing a longer game than he realized. I wasn't looking for an apology. I was looking for accountability. I didn't just want to push back on the fine. I wanted to make sure no one else in the neighborhood would ever have to deal with the same nonsense. So I went to work. I started attending the HOA board meetings, not as a protester, not waving. Signs, just as a curious homeowner asking reasonable questions. Questions like, can you show me where in the bylaws it says solar panels are a finable offense? Or, how is the fine amount determined exactly? That one was my favorite, because the answer changed every time. I brought a binder with me, thick and tabbed, with copies of the community charter, state housing laws, and Public Utility Commission regulations regarding solar access rights. Every time Roger tried to spin one of his made-up rules, I'd flip a tab, point to a clause, and let the silence do the rest. It was like watching a magician get exposed on stage, except this magician still thought the rabbit was in the hat, while the audience had already seen it under the table. Other homeowners started noticing. A few people I'd never even spoken to started sitting closer to me during meetings. They whispered things like, good point, and he's been doing this for years, you know. One older woman, Mrs. Hargrove, who lived 3 houses down, leaned over one night and said, I got fined for putting out a bird bath, said it violated the landscaping policy. That was all I needed to hear. The next day, I paid my attorney Monica to pull a full history of every fine Roger had issued in the last 3 years. We filed a Freedom of Information request with the HOA's management company and got access to all the board's minutes and enforcement actions. What we found was stunning. Over 70% of the fines were issued personally by Roger, and almost all of them had no supporting vote, no documentation, and no due process. Worse still, several of the fines were against elderly homeowners or single parents, people less likely to push back, or people who had probably just paid to make the problem go away. The entire thing smelled like a racket. A suburban shakedown operation dressed up in bylaws and bureaucracy. So I planned my move. At the next board meeting, I showed up early. Not to cause trouble, but to make sure I had a front row seat. The room was full, more than usual. Word had spread that something was going to happen. The air felt different. Less like a meeting, more like a trial. Roger came in late, clipboard in hand, acting like nothing was wrong. He started the meeting the way he always did. Some brief updates about landscaping contracts and holiday light policies, the usual fluff. But when he tried to move on without addressing the solar panel fines, I raised my hand. He sighed dramatically. Yes, Mr. Walters. "I'd like to raise a motion," I said calmly. "You're not on the board. I'm a dues-paying homeowner, and I'm invoking the homeowner clause in Article 4, Section C, which allows for a motion to be introduced by petition, and I have the petition right here." I handed it to the board secretary. It was signed by over 20 homeowners. That was more than enough. Roger's face started to tighten. "And what's the motion?" I moved to remove Roger Townsend as HOA president effective immediately, pursuant to Article 6, Section A, due to multiple instances of misconduct, abuse of authority, and failure to disclose financial conflicts of interest. The room went quiet. Roger's voice cracked. "This is ridiculous." But the board members weren't looking at him. They were looking at the evidence I'd brought, neatly compiled binders, each one labeled and tabbed, handed out before the meeting started. I'd given them everything: the irregular fines, the lack of board votes, and, most importantly, the fact that I held Roger's mortgage. That last part struck like a thunderbolt. He had never disclosed it, and now his debt was a matter of public record. One of the newer board members, a middle-aged guy named Marcus, spoke up. "Is it true? Do you owe him money?" Roger fumbled. "It's irrelevant. This is a personal vendetta." Another board member, Susan, shook her head. "You're making financial decisions that affect the community while financially obligated to a homeowner. That's a textbook conflict." Roger turned to me, red-faced. "You think you're some kind of hero? You bought my mortgage just to humiliate me?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The board called a vote. It wasn't even close. 5 votes to 0. Roger was removed as president on the spot. He tried to protest, to claim the meeting was illegitimate, that the motion was invalid. But the bylaws were clear, and for once, everyone in that room had read them. He stormed out, muttering something under his breath, slamming the door behind him. The silence that followed felt electric. No one cheered. No one high-fived. It wasn't that kind of victory. It was quieter, more meaningful, like watching a storm pass and realizing the sun's finally coming back. After the meeting, people stayed behind to shake my hand. Not because they liked me. I hadn't lived there long enough for that. But because someone had finally stood up. Someone had called out the bully and walked away still standing. The best part? The board didn't just remove Roger. They decided to go back and audit every fine he had issued. A few days later, I received a letter from the HOA, not a threat this time, but an apology. My fines were not only voided, but the board acknowledged that they had been issued improperly and without due process. They even offered to refund any payments I had made. I never paid a cent, of course. But I appreciated the gesture. They also asked if I'd consider joining the board. I politely declined. My work was almost done. Almost. I wasn't interested in being on the HOA board. I'd made my point. The bully had been dethroned, and the rules were finally being applied the right way. That should have been enough. But some people don't know when to quit. A week after Roger was officially removed, I received a thick, crumpled envelope in my mailbox with no return address. Inside were printed pages, maybe 10 of them, stuffed with what looked like screenshots of my social media accounts, LinkedIn profiles, a couple articles written about my old tech company, and one photo of my house from across the street. It wasn't a threat exactly. There were no direct accusations or demands. But it had that feeling, like someone whispering, "I'm watching you," from the shadows. At the bottom of the last page was a scribbled note in blue ink. "You've made a lot of enemies. I'd watch your back if I were you." I didn't. Need to guess who sent it. Roger was the kind of guy who couldn't accept defeat. Losing the HOA presidency wasn't just a blow to his pride. It was an existential crisis. He'd spent years using that role to feed his ego, treating the position like a badge of honor, like he was the sheriff in a town with no law. Being removed in front of a full room with evidence and signatures was probably the most public humiliation he'd ever suffered. But this wasn't high school. This was real life, and I wasn't about to let a passive-aggressive pamphlet shake me. Still, I documented everything, took photos of the envelope, kept all the pages, logged the incident. Then I called Monica again. She sighed when I described the contents. "That man really doesn't know how to stop digging, does he?" "Nope," I said. "But I've got a shovel, too." We filed a formal harassment complaint through the HOA's management company and submitted a report to the police, not because I expected them to act, but to make sure there was a paper trail. Then I sent Roger a certified letter through my lawyer. It was short, direct, and unmistakably clear. Any further contact from him, personal, indirect, anonymous, or otherwise, would result in legal action. For about a month, things were quiet. No more letters. No more sightings of Roger's HOA golf cart. His lawn grew shaggy, his porch light flickered out and stayed off, and his blinds remained shut. The man had practically disappeared. Some neighbors joked he was still pacing around inside, writing angry letters to himself. But life around the neighborhood? It changed. People started talking more. Sidewalks that were once silent turned into weekend stroll routes. There were front yard conversations. Lemonade stands run by kids who'd once been told their signage was too unprofessional. Mrs. Hargrove finally put her bird bath back in. Someone down the block hung a swing from their front tree. And no one cared. The board meetings became less tense. With Roger gone, decisions were made faster and more democratically. They even passed a new amendment legalizing solar panels with a one-page approval form. I helped write it, but only from the sidelines. I was finally doing what I came here to do, enjoying my home. And then one afternoon, I got a phone call. Not from Roger, from his bank. Apparently, Roger had defaulted on his mortgage. The one I now owned. He hadn't made a payment in 2 months. The bank had tried contacting him, but he wasn't answering their letters or calls. Since I owned the note, they were asking what I wanted to do. I had a choice. I could start foreclosure proceedings, or I could renegotiate. I thought about it, really thought about it. For all the trouble Roger had caused me, I didn't want to ruin his life. He had a wife, 2 teenage kids, and a retirement probably already hanging by a thread. But the thing was, I couldn't just let it go either. Actions have consequences. So I made one more move. I drafted a letter, personally this time. No legal jargon, just plain words. It said, "Roger, you're behind on your payments. You know this. But I'm not here to gloat. I'm offering you a deal. Refinance the debt at a lower monthly payment, but with one condition. You write a formal letter of resignation from any future HOA involvement, and you agree not to run for the board again under any name or proxy. You step away for good, and the slate is clean. No foreclosure, no lawsuit. This is your second chance. Take it or don't. That's your choice. Mark Walters." I hand-delivered the envelope to his mailbox. No threats, no theatrics, just a deal. A week passed, no response. Then, 2. And then one day I found a letter in my own mailbox. Inside was a signed agreement, typed neatly, with his signature at the bottom. He'd taken the deal, and that was that. No more power plays, no more fines, no more golf cart parades or laminated rule books handed out like sacred scripture. Roger faded quietly into the background of the neighborhood like a retired actor whose spotlight finally went out. People still ask me sometimes at block parties or while out walking if I'd do it all again, if it was worth it. My answer: absolutely, because when people abuse power, no matter how small that power might seem, they rely on silence. They count on no one speaking up. They expect fear, resignation, submission. But when someone finally does stand up, even in a place as ordinary as a suburban street, it sends a message that ripples far and wide. You don't have to be loud to win. You just have to be smarter, calmer, more relentless. In the end, I didn't just get my solar panels, I got my peace. And the neighborhood, it got its soul back.